My name is Claire Bien. As far back as I can remember, I have always had that still, quiet, inner voice that would make its presence known when I was trying to make a decision. I've always called it instinct. I began hearing voices that seemed to belong to people in my environment in April 1983, following two life events: the suicide of a first cousin from China, who my mother was sponsoring as a foreign student in the US, and being passed over for a promotion at work. I was 31 years old. I was so distraught about my cousin's suicide and angry about work that I decided to take my own life. Fortunately, my husband and our landlady kept me from following through. The first voices were mostly kind, and most of them belonged to family. The strangers' voices were just curious, and at first I heard them only in public. But the strangers' voices became judgmental after my husband and I moved to New Haven, Connecticut in August, and I began hearing them when I was home alone. On Halloween Day, while I was taking an editing test, a friendly little voice told me I'd missed something. I looked and saw that sure enough I had, and made the correction. Then I got really paranoid, thinking someone must be spying on me. So I proceeded to smash all the light bulbs in the living room, looking for hidden cameras. I was forced by a psychiatrist to commit myself that night to a private psychiatric hospital. The psychiatrist said that if I didn't commit myself, she would commit me, and I would have fewer rights. I was diagnosed with major depression with psychotic features. I refused all medications, but went to all group and individual therapies and engaged fully in life at the hospital. I signed out against medical advice on November 11th, Armistice Day, which I hoped was significant.
In order to involuntarily commit someone, which is the euphemism for psychiatric imprisonment, the state has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that as a result of mental illness, the person is a danger of serious harm to himself or themselves or others, or so disabled that they are unable to survive safely in freedom. And even if so, they have to prove that there's no less restrictive alternative. For forced drugging, the state has to prove that the person is incompetent to decline the medication, which is a farce all in itself, and that the psychiatric drugs are in their best interest, and there's no less intrusive alternative available.
The numbers of people getting forcibly hospitalized and forcibly treated has actually been rising dramatically for decades. In British Columbia, doubling. In Ontario, doubling. In California, 30-day detentions tripled. Child detainees tripled. In Colorado, doubling. Nevada, doubling. Indiana, doubling. Florida, doubling.
Do drugs that we're using for mental health, psychiatric drugs, do they do more long-term harm than good?
Oh, these drugs fix a chemical balance in the brain like insulin for diabetes. We tell people this because it becomes an explanation they can understand as to why they should take the drug.
I was a kid when I was first put on antidepressants, and I just did what the adults told me to do, and I took a pill if I had a headache, and I took pills for what they told me I needed. And so it wasn't until I was 30 years old when I realized I had never had an unmedicated moment as an adult, and I was still suicidal and severely depressed, so something wasn't working here. And so I just decided, okay, I need to figure out how to get off these drugs and discover my baseline. But I went to a doctor who didn't know what she was talking about, and she pulled me off way too quickly, and I was plunged into severe antidepressant withdrawal.
Well, first of all, a black box warning is the most serious of all warnings that the FDA issues. At that point, in 2003, we started going out. 2004, we met a lot of families, and these hearings, it's amazing what the power of people and people like you and I, everyday people who've had experiences, when they show up and tell their story.
49% of Americans have reported having a significant spiritual or religious experience that changed their worldview, that changed them. That's a significant number. That's a significant number of people that have never talked about their experiences because they're afraid of being ridiculed or shamed or having the sacredness of their experience taken away from them. Very often, they're very difficult to describe. And when you do try to describe these experiences, you cannot convey the actual experience.
I was very, very dissatisfied with the fact that traditional psychiatrists call these states altered states. I see it in a kind of a pejorative term that doesn't reflect, how much respect I have for them. But I was particularly interested in these non-ordinary states that are healing, that are transformative, that are potentially evolutionary, and that also have what we call heuristic value, which is that they can bring absolutely new information about the psyche, about human nature, about the nature of reality. So those would be states that, for example, the shamans experience as part of the initiatory crisis, or states that native cultures experience in rites of passage or some other powerful rituals, the kind of states that the initiates experience in ancient mysteries of death and rebirth in Egypt and in Greece and other places, the experiences that people have in different forms of yoga, in different forms of Buddhism, the Sufis experience, the Christian mystics, the Kabbalists, and so on. And it was just unbelievable to me that we don't have a special name for them. We put everything into that one bag of altered states, and the implication is that they are all pathological. You see, we don't have a category, a spiritual experience, a mystical experience. So anybody who has any kind of episode of non-ordinary states would be seen as mentally ill and would be getting medication and a diagnosis and so on. So when we did a lot of work with these states and we discovered the healing and the transformative potential, we started calling these spontaneous states spiritual emergencies or psychospiritual crises. And so much of our work was actually supporting people who had spontaneous episodes rather than suppressing the experience, was to actually encouraging people to go into it and through it.
I conducted my doctorate research on spiritual emergence, spiritual emergency, and how trauma is connected to this topic. So research has shown that clients do want to have spirituality integrated into therapy. Research has also shown that the helping professions have done a fairly poor job at integrating spirituality into therapy. Most importantly, cultural competence is an ethical principle that the helping professions need to abide by. And there are many spiritual phenomena in different cultures that the helping professions need to be aware of. If you are experiencing overwhelm because of these experiences, and then you are not properly supported, as one should be supported when you're experiencing trauma, which is to be offered a safe, supportive environment, mistreatment of trauma or mistreatment of a spiritual emergency can then be even more traumatizing. Spirituality is a very important piece of the human experience, and I think that validating spirituality is very important.
Spiritual competency is now recognized as a core part of cultural competency throughout the healthcare field. Spirituality and religion really do qualify as aspects of diversity in the same league of importance as ethnicity, race, gender, and sexual orientation. And yet, as we both know from our own training, spirituality and religion are ignored in the main training programs that exist. One of the reasons that we think there has been this oversight is that there is a lack of validated guidelines for spiritual and religious competency.
Which may appear to be mental disorders may in fact be religious or spiritual conflicts. The acceptance of this new category was an important milestone in the growing recognition of mystical experiences.
Treating highly sensitive people, or HSPs, as mentally ill is an injustice that destroys one's dignity, sense of agency, and the basic human right to become who we are truly meant to be. Human beings on a trajectory of growth that is meant to be never-ending, conscious seekers of spiritual truth. This world needs people with neurodivergent gifts, canaries in the coal mine, if you will, who can access a deep well of empathy, compassion, emotional intelligence, creativity, ingenuity, and sensitivity. If the goal is to build toward a healthier, kinder, sustainably more equitable world.
You authored the 8 Dimensions of Wellness, correct?
Yes.
And so just give us a brief history of when did you start creating it, because it's been building, and when did the spiritual part come in, because you added that spiritual dimension?
Well, it's really, there's been, the dimensions have evolved from like early on in the behavioral health space. It came about in my work in the 80s and the early 90s. It always was there. Well, the 8 dimensions, we added on the occupational, the financial, and environmental were the ones that came on. So the others were always originally there, pretty much.
And where is it being used? Where have you seen it spread? Because I've seen it on the college campus and in different offices. Where has this spread? And I think there's a SAMHSA has picked it up as well.
So college campuses historically from the 70s were always focusing on wellness. There's a whole history behind wellness. The word came about in the 1960s, around the time I was born. There was Dr. Halbert Dunn brought the high-level wellness term, and some doctors came about, and that wellness model was sort of on college campuses back in the 70s and 80s in a sense they had, but the 8 dimensions was really endorsed when SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, adopted this model that we had here at CSP. We were involved in some advocacy work with them around the lifespan disparity of people served by the public mental health system. So they said, well, we want to focus on they were thinking physical health because there was so many many medical issues that were killing people earlier than the general population, or shortening the quality of their life. And we said, we have to focus on wellness. And so they adopted the 8 dimensions through a campaign probably around 2000. And the campaign really started 2010 and 11, though the initial advocacy work was in 2007 and 8. It takes that long to get things moving. And then basically it really became popular like around 2011 and 12 to now. And so it's been adopted more and more on college campuses, as well as in schools, working with youth, young adults. There's work with athletes. I'm working with a number of different projects. So the model has been very well. The National Park Services has a project that they're doing with their workers because they're at places where high stress, vulnerable groups, which was all of us, is that this model has been seen as really a way to help people to understand, taking care of themselves, and then look at the environmental and the structural places in our workplaces and in our institutions, in our hospitals, or whatever, that can help support the wellness of people. So that's really where a lot of places are taking it.
What is A.W.A.R.E? What does it stand for? Are we aware of religious experiences in mental health crises? We are more than just a movie or docuseries in development. We are a coalition of leaders in psychology, mental health, and religion. Have you experienced a spiritual emergency or awakening? Do you practice in the areas of psychology, psychiatry, or mental health? Are your cultural beliefs of a certain religion or spirituality? Learn more about us. Come find us. Join our movement.
We're the canaries in the